Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this afternoon's panels, the AI and skills turn, driver or disruptor of skills-based education. Today, we're fortunate to explore these issues with three panelists from a mix of industry and academia, bringing a diverse but complementary perspectives to this conversation. We've got Alfonso Asensio, who's a senior executive bridging data-driven transformation in Japan and Silicon Valley. Matthias Frey, a researcher at Sony CSL, working on the frontiers of computing and innovation. And Sean McMinn, director of the Center of Education and Innovation at HKUST, and a longstanding leader in the space of digital literacy and AI in higher education. And I'd actually like to ask each of you to give a short self-introduction, because I think you're best positioned to tell a little bit about your background and how it relates to this topic. Alfonso, why don't we start with you?
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. So my name is Alfonso. Apologies, I couldn't not list it up there, but I'm currently working at Google, but I have to come with my different affiliation. So I've been in the digital space for the last, I don't know, like 15 years. I come from a marketing background, and I've been working both with Japanese corporations and also quite a few Silicon Valley companies. Originally, there has been an evolution on the sort of work that global corporations in the technology space have done. Originally, it was all about big data. Then everything became digital, and now everything is AI. My personal opinion, it's all very related. It's just an evolution of the same topic. What we are seeing is, to a degree, similar to the things that we saw 15 years ago with digital media coming in, and before that with the original internet development. So familiar waters to a degree, but also a lot of questions and issues that we also will be talking in forums like this one. Thank you.
Sean?
Hello. As mentioned, I'm the director for the Center for Education and Innovation at HKUST in Hong Kong. And I wear multiple hats in that role, where I help faculty develop in innovative pedagogies, whether it's using technologies or other means like gamification, experiential learning, and so on. But also helping with senior management in universities to rethink curriculum, ranging from curriculum design, but also design of classrooms and the technologies and the layout that we need for the classrooms as well. So for example, we're building a new teaching and learning building, and we're thinking about what do we need to include in this new building, and how does AI play a role? What role will it play so that it's sustainable 5-10 years down the road? And then, of course, AI assessment, design, and so on. I've had the pleasure of being on a panel here at IAFOR and ACE 2 years ago with Justin, talking about AI in education. And it's very relevant to what we'll be talking about today, and its impact on the skills that students need to develop, or that they might be losing in the age of AI.
Thank you very much for the invitation today. My name is Matthias Frey. I have a background in semiconductors and communications, and I was working in industry in Japan and in Switzerland for several years before joining the Embassy of Switzerland as the head of the science section, where I was in charge of university collaborations between Switzerland and Japan. Then 8 years ago, I joined Sony, first as technology scout, and then again in charge of university strategic collaborations. Before also, sorry, I forgot to mention, I was also advisor to the president of Tokyo Tech for internationalization of the university. It's a university called Science Tokyo at the moment. I moved back into research a few months ago, half a year ago. So I'm working again on semiconductors now, and I'm learning myself using AI again as my teacher. The only teaching experience I have was as a judo teacher in Switzerland before coming back to Japan. So looking forward to this discussion.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. So as you can see, we've got quite a wealth of experience and some diverse backgrounds that should contribute to a very interesting conversation. I'm going to take just a couple minutes to frame this a little bit, and then we'll get into the questions. So as you all know, across education, industry, and society more generally, we're definitely seeing a decisive shift in capabilities and what it means to be educated. For around 150 years to the last 200 years or so, education, particularly higher education, has primarily been centered around disciplines. And that's kind of how we come up through the educational ranks, and this is guarded by degrees. Over the last, and this certainly is still the situation in the majority of institutions around the world. But over the last 15 years or so, there's been a global growing interest in skills-based or competency-based education. So this shifts more from what do you know or what are you an expert in to what can you actually do. And this is largely manifested through things like microcredentials, modular learning pathways, competency frameworks, and a lot of workforce training in the form of upskilling and reskilling programs. So this shift towards a skills-based style of education has certainly become more and more prominent over the last decade or so. And now, enter AI, the topic that we've spent a lot of time today talking about, and I'm sure you all have had a lot of conversations on this topic in the recent years. And while AI is certainly creating a stir in both the spheres of education and work, it's already having a major impact on skills, what skills we need, how we develop them, and new tools are automating tasks that once signaled expertise. Things like writing, analysis, being able to support high-level executive decisions. A lot of these things that generally only happened at a very high level in one's career are now being augmented or even outsourced to these new tools that we have. So this forces us to ask not just whether the actual skills that are relevant today or 5 or 10 years in the future are changing, but whether the nature of those skills are actually changing as well. And I think a useful illustration of this comes from the World Economic Forum's Future of Jobs reports. So they just came into their 10th year of these reports. And among other things, one of the things that this Future of Jobs reports does is it lists the top in-demand skills based on employer surveys. And there have been pretty substantial shifts in what those skills are, those top in-demand skills. Back in 2016, when they launched these reports, it was around complex problem solving, critical thinking, interpersonal abilities, which are definitely still relevant today. But the latest one that just came out fairly recently has shifted more towards analytical thinking, resilience, AI literacy, and curiosity and lifelong learning. One of the really interesting findings from this latest report, though, is that most employers reported that they felt that 40% of the core skills that an individual needs in the workforce are going to change over the next 5 years. So that tells us a couple things. One, that the skills that are considered high value are indeed changing, and that pace of change is actually incredibly fast. Actually much faster than most higher education or other training institutions can move in terms of curriculum design. And even microcredentials are having trouble keeping up with the pace of this change. So with that background and context, let's move into the conversation. To get us started, given that the World Economic Forum projects that nearly 40% of these skills will be changing by 2030, I'd like to hear from our panelists, what skills do you believe will rise in both demand and importance, recognizing that those two things are not necessarily the same over the next 10 years. And it would be great if you could also touch on, as we engage more with AI and perhaps outsource a lot of the activities that we do, what skills might we lose as a result of that? Matthias, do you want to start us off?
Thank you very much. So first of all, I think on a short term, there's a clear market demand at the moment for people who are able to use AI, as in simple prompt engineering. You can look at the job ads at the moment, but probably in 5 years, this will change greatly, as we just learned before. So what we are looking for is for critical thinkers, people who can actually fact check And suddenly, not only the skills are required, but also the knowledge, again, is required to check, is the output of the AI or the LLM, generative AI, is it correct? Does it make sense? And also, is it relevant for what I'm looking for? I think we're also looking for skills of being able to synthesize first draft of a report, for example, for creativity in that sense. Yes, it's possible to throw all your data into ChatGPT and get a report, but doesn't that also generate some sort of groupthink? So I think it's better to start with your own draft and then use AI to rethink or to restructure your thoughts. On the human side, I think there's several things we're looking for, and the most important one for me, I think, is being able to communicate your ideas, not just selling it, but also pitching your ideas and discussing with colleagues, if possible, even in various languages, which is sometimes difficult in Japan. So the collaboration and the cultural understanding, I think, is extremely important, also in a tech company like Sony. And last but not least, I think curiosity, that was also mentioned, that leads also to lifelong learning, is of great importance and will remain of great importance.
Thanks. Sure, Sean.
I would agree with everything that you said there, and I'm going to go up another level and actually kind of cross-bound the difference between what is in demand and what is important in that sense. Critical thinking skills are absolutely important and probably will become more in demand in this area. But what we might be missing is the metacognitive awareness part of that. For example, with critical thinking, I could say I'm a critical thinker, but am I really truly understanding how I'm critically thinking through a process? We know from studies that are starting to emerge, and Anthropic came out with a study not too long ago themselves, where we're seeing that students are using the tools to help them with critical thinking. They're using the tools to help analyze, right? It's not just companionship as well, but it's also using it to help with analyzing and critical thinking. And these are the skills that we're saying are becoming increasingly important. In my own research at the university level that I've been doing internally, we're finding that students are doing this. They're using ChatGPT or whatever tool to problem solve and analyze and help them with the critical thinking part. And as a result, we're seeing that it's limiting the depth and the breadth of what they're trying to do, right? Or the knowledge that they're trying to learn or the problem they're trying to solve. So that actually leads into something I think, Justin, you mentioned, what kind of skills are we going to be losing that also might be important? And right now we're talking a lot about the AI and human individual collaboration. And I'll move to another point after that very quickly. But first, if I have a problem and I'm a student and I use AI, I'm more proficient and more efficient in using AI, and I might get that problem and that solution, and it might be accomplished. But if we stop and think, and if I have the metacognitive awareness, I start to become more aware of what might be missing that would have normally occurred across that process. And Eric alluded to this in his talk as well, right? Things like empathy, things like understanding that the solution to this problem might be similar to another context when I experienced that problem, right? And we know that people who are very creative, and creativity is a very important skill to have, we build that creativity based on our past experiences where we're able to identify different experiences and then apply those skills to a new one, right? But if we're automating that process a little bit too much, and yeah, maybe we're being critical thinkers in that process with AI, but if we skip that point in the automation too much, we're losing a lot of that. And that's at the AI and individual level. And not many people yet are talking about AI in the teams level. Eric mentioned the swarm intelligence. And that's AI and agents talking to AI agents to get things done. But what about when we have very sophisticated social technical ecosystems where both the AI and the human are working together in swarms to get things done? What impact and skills are needed for that? What impact does that have on collaboration, communication, and capability? Right? So these are things that I think are becoming increasingly important for us to help teach. And final note before I end up here is that early this morning there was a lot of talk about the Japanese curriculum and moving towards self-directed learning. I think that's great. But can we also talk about self-regulated learning, which helps students develop some of these skills that are increasingly becoming important?
Thanks.
It might be because I might be overly pragmatical when I think about this, because the people that I can have to hire for my team, and also the advice that I have to give my clients on who is the best person to do a certain job. When thinking about the skills, I think the one that I will emphasize about everything else will be this discernment. So meaning the ability to judge properly. Because if you understand what are the capabilities and what are the boundaries of AI, then you are able to realize what is the added value that you can bring in, right? And that is gonna be, there's gonna be an ebb and flow, that's gonna be moving. I don't think we have a full picture at the moment, but having that almost a spider sense when you can feel that there is a gap in the capabilities of a given model, I believe is what's gonna give you an ability. And if you think about it, that has been the evolution we have seen for the life. It has taken us a while, maybe about a decade, to get comfortable with digital media to a degree. With social media, think about how you were using maybe LinkedIn a few years back and how you use it now, right? Think about the sort of post that you might be putting in your personal feed compared to what you do now. You get almost an exposure to a new tool, and then you develop a sensitivity and a discernment to try to figure out how it works and what is the best way of using it. I think that's probably what is going to happen with AI moving forward, but just having that mindset, which allows you to judge properly, I think that's going to be a critical key, critical skill moving forward.
Great. Thanks very much. If I might ask a follow-up question to that. So all three of you immediately went into very human skills, critical thinking, discernment, judgment. In terms of actual technical skills, do you think you see these waxing or waning over the next few years? So for example, a few years ago, being able to work with SEO was really important, or being, programming languages, or even in our field, instructional design, these sort of technical expertise. Do you think that it's going to continue to be important to have expertise in these types of technical skills, or that these will recede somewhat?
So at the moment, I think for prototyping, like when we talk about programming, there's a thing called vibe coding that is in the media a lot today. Basically, everyone can write an app, right? But this app might not be production ready. But my opinion, in 2 years, this is going to change again. So in that moment, we're going to use less programmers, so we're going to use less people with that kind of technical skills.
Thanks.
We're teaching that a little bit at universities, and also programs like DeFi or RagFlow, where you're using no coding tools to code. I would argue that there's still an importance for people to understand how large language models work if we're talking about AI. I think technological knowledge is still important because if you don't understand how these models are trained, how the content policy influences how the models behave, and how the platforms are designed in that sense, right? There is a chance for you to misuse or not use them well enough, right? I'm thinking back to the early days of Corel and Microsoft Word and all these other programs that were emerging. Those who understood how to use word processors were able to create better documents. I know that's a very simple argument in that sense, but the analogy is quite similar. So technological knowledge is still important. You're talking about coding, and I've heard you guys would know more about this than I would, of industries getting rid of the technical department, or at least bringing it in to work alongside the analysts. And I think that's very interesting development, actually.
Just following up on what you just say, I think technology is always going to be a black box, unless you are a specialist. But my kids are big fans of YouTube, right? So as they were getting older, the one thing that I explained to them, say, look, you don't need to understand how YouTube works. You do need to understand what is the flow of the players, and also what is the flow of the money, because that will give you an understanding of the tool. I think to a degree, technical skills for AI, it might not be you have to understand how the models develop their understanding, but I do think you have to have an understanding, as Son said, how do they work, how they are trained, where they get the data from, and what is the agenda behind them, because obviously it's a very serious investment of money, and that's going to give you a clue of the directions that they are going to take.
Do you say computational thinking is important then?
Not so much. I default to the business side, so to speak, because I think is you create the tool or the product, and then is how do you apply it. I think that's what is going to give you most of the usage use cases, at least from my perspective.
Just one point. I totally agree with what you say, but I think what is tricky about AI, it's not tricky about YouTube, but AI, I've been working with AI since 2017 or something, but I get tricked on a regular basis by AI that it overpromises or it oversells itself. So to get I know what the background is. It's basically an autocomplete. Nevertheless, I wasted a lot of time believing what AI told me, what ChatGPT or Gemini told me was correct. So it's not quite the same as other technologies like social media, I think, because it actively tries to deceive you as such. That sounds like a human again, but I know it's a machine behind it, but still, it's a different technology in my opinion.
I guess understanding that. Sorry, Justin, I don't
No,
mean to
no,
hijack there.
absolutely.
But I mean, on what you're saying there, it's very interesting. I heard a great phrasing of this is we have to remind ourselves that they are probability machines, to borrow from Hitchhiker's Guide in that sense. But the point that they said was even when it gives you the correct answer, it's still not the correct answer. And I thought, yeah, that's a really good way of looking at it. Right? And that's how we should, if we understand that, we may make better decision making. Right? And decision making is very important in that sense, yeah.
Awesome, thank you. So we kind of circled around back there to the importance of decision-making, discernment, judgment, critical thinking. And I don't know if you guys noticed this, but we're not exactly a representative panel for this region. We've got a lot of deep experience here, but this is not where we come from. This is not where our programming comes from. And so given that AI is seen as sort of this thing that sits above us, that globally around the world, regardless of region, we're interacting with this tool that seems like it's outside of us, but actually these tools were created largely in particular cultural contexts. They often reinforce particular ways of thinking of the cultures in which they were developed. So here in this region, what do you think that educators can or should be doing to sort of help learners develop the capacity for critical thinking, interacting with these tools, understanding that the truth or a truth that they're given from these tools may not necessarily be their truth, or that they have to have this critical element to it to understand that there are biases inherent in these things that we tend to think of machines as being unbiased, but in this case, they're very much not. So what can we as educators do to help our students thrive in this sort of world, particularly when, as was mentioned earlier, a lot of the sort of critical thinking is being outsourced to these tools themselves?
Okay. So I'm not an educator, but and I might not, Justin, apologies, I might not answer directly what you mentioned, but I do a lot of work with Gen AI. So a lot of the companies that I've been working with, they use AI to generate images or videos. So I think what we are seeing at the moment is it's getting harder to identify what is real and what is not. The nature of reality as we perceive it is getting confusing, right? With all these images and all these videos. And I'll give you two examples because it's a two-way street. I was working in my previous role with this very large Japanese airline company. So it's one of the two that you are thinking. And they created an in-flight video that it was done by my company, and it was fully AI generated, right? And it saw people coming to Japan, sakura trees, and old gentlemen preparing soba noodles, right? And it was fascinated because I have seen how it has been done, and I couldn't believe that it was all AI, like the expression of the people, and the fact that a large company like this decided to embrace full AI and put it on a inbound airline for people to have a taste of Japan rather than going and filming it. That was quite telling. On the other hand, I don't know if you remember when there was that big haste in the Louvre Museum in Paris. There was a very famous picture that had two policemen guarding the gate, and this very peculiar, very dapper young gentleman with a fedora, it looked like out of a 1930s movie. And the internet went wild thinking that that was an AI-generated image because it was very incongruous, right? It was those two policemen and then this guy looking like a step out of a Bogart movie. And the photographer who took the picture went on record saying, no, it's real, I was there, I took the picture, right? So we are at this stage where to define reality for something, you kind of have to go at the source and say, I was there, I saw it, it is real. And things that you think this is absolutely real. This gentleman was making soba in his, shop in Kyoto. That is not real. So the definition of reality, even before we get to what is the bias that might be embedded on some of these models, I'm wondering if we are going to get to the point where we need to have some sort of seal of authenticity in order to identify what is surrounding us, because it's getting, I don't know about you, but I'm getting very, very confused of things that I see. Just my 2 cents.
Thanks.
Can I just briefly follow up to that? There are actually initiatives, there's cameras that add this seal of approval, that this was taken, this is a real photo, it hasn't been manipulated. It's not just Sony who does it, it's also other companies who have that, like professional cameras. So I think there are ways of knowing this picture was taken at this time, at this place, and it hasn't been manipulated afterwards. Just to go back to your question again, sorry, the initial question, what can educators do? I think it's important to, first of all, teach there are biases, first of all. And here in this conference, we've only been talking about ChatGPT, or most of the time when we talk about generative AI or LLMs, we talk about ChatGPT. There are other versions of LLMs. There's C-Line, for example, from Southeast Asian languages in one model, from Singapore AI Initiative. We signed an agreement with them as well. But there's all kinds of regional LLMs that could be used that have different biases in there. I'm not saying they're bias-free, but they have different biases in there. So I think it's good to use also there some more diverse models than only American-based ChatGPT or Gemini, right? So maybe that's a very simple solution for a beginning also.
Thanks.
I'm going to comment on that, but also what you mentioned about how images are trust, right? Our trust in what we see is slowly decreasing because of this. We had a similar situation in Hong Kong. A major typhoon came through Hong Kong, and there's a fantastic photo published in the South China Morning Post of a man sitting on a bench and a big wave hitting him. He survived, but the picture was taken at the right time, and it's a beautiful photo. No one believed that it was real, right? And then coming to your point about watermarks, you're talking about watermarks, right? That's assuming people will look up to make sure that the watermark is there, right? So we assume too much about us humans being critical, right? And critical thinking and looking at these images and that. And that comes back to a little bit about the other comment that you said. I think sometimes we focus too much in a binary direction, right? So you say we should be teaching about the bias that are in the machines, right? And yeah, there are regional LLMs. For example, in Hong Kong, because ChatGPT and Google and other players aren't available in Hong Kong because the companies chose not to come to Hong Kong, not because Hong Kong said you can't, we developed our own large language model based off of DeepSeek. And also because of Cantonese, right, to have a large language model that represents Cantonese as well. But that, of course, has bias in it. But coming back to the binary approach, what about the human cognitions and our own biases, right? This is equally important as well. And I noticed, Eric, on your slide, you had reads going through the books that you should read at the beginning, and you had Think Fast and Slow, right? Fantastic book, right? And it's a great book that talks about how humans think fast, think slow, and quite often we're not very good critical thinkers, and we allow bias to slip in, and our perception of the world is not always what we think it is, and so on. So if we can enhance our curriculum so we focus on both, but not just both in isolation, how the two biases and what happens when the two converge. And this is something that we perhaps don't always talk a little bit about, right? So if I'm prompt engineering, sure, I might be writing good prompts, but how much of my own bias is going into how I'm writing my prompt? And then when I get the result, how I interpret the result, not just because I know the language model might be biased in how it's giving me a result, but how I perceive how I read that and then apply it into a task, right? So this true human AI collaboration skill is increasingly becoming important.
There is, and there is also such a thing as overcorrection. So there is a big technology company that shall remain unnamed, where they realized that a lot of the responses the models were doing in the initial stages, for example, they will offer in images of Viking Age Scandinavians and Second World War German soldiers in very improbable ethnicities, right? So that was obviously an overcorrection of the model, right? So sometimes you kind of have to watch in both sides, because you might end up doing more damage than it will just not be a realistic depiction of some historical facts, I think.
Thanks very much for that, Jonah. Continuing on this thread a little bit about what educators can do. One of the things that I would really like to be able to achieve with this panel is to give the audience some concrete ideas about how, at the institutional level, universities and other institutions are approaching these evolving requirements. So Sean is our representative from the university sector. What is your institution doing to build meaningful AI literacy among students?
We're taking multiple directions, or strategies in a sense. The first and the easiest that I'll talk about is faculty development. Right? We're providing a number of initiatives within the university to help faculty understand the impact AI is having on the discipline, and that ranges from AI assessment design to understanding how students use it. We've run similar surveys where we know students are using it and that they're using it for analytical thinking, reasoning, brainstorming, writing first drafts, and so on. So faculty development's important. But at the student level, this is something that we're just starting to really get serious about, is we're revamping our what we call the Common Core curriculum. And the Common Core curriculum takes up about 30 credits of our university's entire UG career. And students, originally it was meant to broaden their knowledge beyond their own discipline. Now we're going to require them to take 6 credits out of that 30 credits on AI literacy, so they're prepared and understand how AI works. But we are also very cautious in how we do this, because we've been observing other universities and what they're doing. And we see things like, well, they're going heavy on the technological knowledge side. They're just looking at it as a tool. Let's teach them how it works, what a large language model it is, what neural networks are, and all that other stuff that are useful, but that's their approach. And then we look at other end, and on another end, we're seeing a lot of universities where they're doing AI plus X. So we're seeing the emergence of courses like AI in Buddhism, AI in creativity. I'm not making this up. I'm seeing these courses, right? And on the surface, it looks interesting. It looks like the university is being proactive. But if you dig a little bit deeper, you can just see that they're just slapping AI onto a course. Okay. So we feel that we need to take a more pragmatic approach, a more serious approach in that sense. And we're trying to break down the skills and the competencies that are needed in an AI-mediated world. And we refer to things at the classics like Bloom's taxonomy and so on, and different knowledge domains. And in designing courses now, we've created up a matrix and a framework where we ask the faculty in their disciplines to think about these 4 areas. One, we'll call it domain knowledge and discipline knowledge, how AI is impacting that. So what is there to know about your domain or your discipline, and how do you go about knowing it in AI, knowing that AI is now here, right? And that can impact from medical education to business marketing, even to the humanities. Okay. The other knowledge domain that we're asking them to think about is procedural knowledge. So can you design courses that help students understand how AI is having an impact on how we do things, right? Because AI is having an impact on automation, how workflows operate, and that ranges from research, it ranges from business workflows, all sorts of different contexts. So you can help students understand AI's impact across procedural knowledge. Then, of course, yes, there's a technological knowledge domain. That's important too. So you can design courses around that. And then the fourth domain that we're asking them to think about is cognitive and employability skills. And I think that aligns with what we're talking about in this panel, is designing courses on how AI can augment creativity, can augment critical thinking, or things that you need to be aware about, and what kind of skills I need in the future of work. So we're hoping that at the university level, if we can design our general education across these four knowledge domains, and faculty members from different departments are able to map their courses to these, and this is how we promote the courses to students, that gives them flexibility and an opportunity to rethink the type of general education courses, and they might see the relevance later on down the road, right? And then on top of that, we help faculty think about their assessment design in these courses. Eric, you mentioned process is very important, right, in assessment design. I agree, although we haven't figured out the scalability of that issue yet, because when you try to increase process-oriented assessments in a course and you scale that up, suddenly faculty members are complaining about workload, right? So we don't have the right answer yet, but this is the direction we're going.
Thanks very much for sharing that, Sean. Alfonso Mateus, using Sean's experience at HKUST as a sort of entry point, sitting on the industry side of things, if you were to be asked to advise a university on what their strategy should be or what they should be doing to enhance AI literacy among their students, what kind of advice would you give?
Thank you. So first of all, we work a lot at Sony with universities. We have internal programs for senior managers for reskilling, and I think reskilling is one of the most important things at the moment because things are changing extremely fast, and there we rely also on universities. Also, we recently started offering LinkedIn courses, for example, to all employees. That's another thing that we did. For us, again, I think critical thinking is important, and that's also one thing that we can collaborate with the universities, or we would like to ask the universities to teach. Also, I think what hasn't been discussed that much so far is that self-confidence. I think, especially also in Japan, when students enter a company, it's important to be able to communicate and to be confident in one's own skills. And I think that's something also that universities can give their students with lots of presentations, with discussions among each other and so on. So again, this morning was mentioned several times, the human interaction is of greatest importance. And I think that's also something that the universities can teach. And maybe one more human skill is also grit. That hasn't been mentioned that much yet, but I had the experience recently also with the younger graduates who joined or as interns. They're not that resilient anymore to stress, as in, for example, when they're programming, things don't work in the beginning, they put it into ChatGPT. ChatGPT doesn't give the right answer 2-3 times, and they would come, it's like, it doesn't work. It's like, well, someone has to get it done, right? So good luck on that, and please come back when you solve the problem. So I think, I'm not sure if this is AI related, or is it just other things that have changed over time, but that's something I saw recently that is different than from 5 years ago or 10 years ago.
Briefly comment, I'm glad that you said grit. I think that is so important. I really agree with you. And it comes back to the point I made earlier that if we automate students' learning processes is a little bit too much, we're taking away the possibility for them to develop that skill. So it is AI related in the sense that we may be losing that skill in that sense. I mean, Hong Kong as well, students give up very easily. The COVID, the pandemic, and prior to that, the social unrest really had an impact on our students' ability to work through problems. And I'm not an expert in this area, and if you ever want to look her up, it's Professor Rose Luckin out of the UK. She has done a lot of work in the role of emotion and self-regulated learning, how important emotion is to our learning process. And she's very, very concerned about how AI might be detrimental to our ability to develop those emotions, right? Think about how we have intrinsic motivation, but how we overcome failure and resilience and all of these things that are related to grit. Very, very important.
I think my perspective will be twofold. One will be look at the basics, right? Like LLM models rely on data, Like you get good data in, you probably get better results if you get really bad data in. So having a good understanding of what is the sort of data they are being used to train the models, and also the data that fits the models, is very different. Something like Gemini that is very reliant on Google or YouTube data. That's something like ChatGPT that has a lot of partnerships with different publishers, or something like Rufus, which relies a lot of e-commerce data from Amazon, right? So that kind of shapes the personality of the model to a degree. But the second point that I would recommend looking at is this is a moving car, right? So if you think about when somebody mentioned AI prior November 2022, probably the image that came to your head will be something like, HAL 9000 from Space Odyssey, or Skynet from Terminator. There was like this cold, remote intelligence, usually with a British accent, like very scary. Then it became a chatbot, right? And it was almost playful. And now we are moving into the next stage, which is, again, Eric mentioned this, the agents, right? Where we are seeing the AI is going from being an influencer to an intermediary. So they are going to be sitting between the source of data and the user. And that, I don't think is good or bad per se, but you have to be mindful of what is those different positionings that the models are taking in their interaction with people, right? So I think if you keep the data piece in your mind, and then you kind of understand how the use case for using models is evolving, I would say that's the first place to develop a literacy for the future.
Thanks very much. Okay, before we turn it over to the audience for questions and comments, one last question to kind of circle back around to the beginning, where we talked about the rise of skill-based education. While I won't say there has been a shift away from degrees and traditional forms of university education, there has been certainly a noticeable growth in things like microcredentials and some of these alternative pathways, which are primarily focused around technical skills. But the conversation today has largely been around, well, skills are going to become more important. They're going to shift, but there's still these very human skills. So from your perspectives, do you see there being a growth and continued trend towards smaller types of educational programs like micro-credentials that are very much focused on being able to do something? Or do you think that more traditional formal styles of education like university degrees are going to continue to be the primary currency going forward?
I'm not a big fan of micro-credentials, I have to admit, because I think that's not the direction we should be going. And I think the current form of higher education is also problematic. So coming to your question, transdisciplinary knowledge. I think if we can somehow find a model that works for higher education, which is still quite often, well, depends on the university. Every university is different, right? Where research is still important, but it's because it's hard to have universities think in a transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary mindset, right? Your mathematician still focuses on their area of research, and someone else from another department in marketing might think in their own, right? So but for teaching and learning, if we can bring those together, right, and have transdisciplinary teaching, Minerva was something that was attempting to do this, right? I think a model like that would work very, very well if we can make this at more scale and across the globe, because knowledge, right, is still important, right? As Eric said, there's that issue of we don't know what we don't know, right? And that has an impact on how we use tools like AI, right? And our skills that you mentioned are very important. These soft skills, although I don't like that term either, are increasingly becoming important. So skills-based, competence-based is important. But knowledge is still important in this AI-mediated world. But we have a gap, we have a hurdle that we have to overcome. So just to give you and finish with a very quick story, I actually had a very brief conversation with a professor which department was he in? I think it was computer science engineering, I believe it was. And we were talking about this very same topic. And I said, a lot of these skills, resilience and grit, are going to become increasingly important. He just did this to me. You still need to know the knowledge and how to do it. You need to know the knowledge. And he just would not listen about the skills. So we have to overcome this barrier. I'm not saying every university is like that, but it's still there, this dichotomy between knowledge and skills. And how can we move so that they're blended together and be transdisciplinary? That's a non-answer, I guess, but there you go. Yeah.
Maybe one more thing that I'd like to add to education. So I did this executive education program, and it was partly online, partly in person. It was a half-year program. And the online courses that I took, I'm not in contact with any of the other students, whereas the on-site program I took was only 3 weeks. I'm in weekly contacts with the people. And everything that they taught us there, not mentioning which institution, I could have learned online on Coursera or Udemy or YouTube or wherever. But the interaction with my colleagues that I still have now is much, much more important. It was partly edutainment, I agree, but it was important, the interaction with others. That's what was most important for this course.
Thank you.
I think the biggest bias that I see, we are all of us very self-centered to a degree. Like we all feel, oh, this is the defining moment of history. This is the problem that we have. But I think if you think about it, the questions we are having about self-identity, what is reality, society, those questions have been around for millennia. It's just we see them in a different light because of this new technology that changes things, right? So when I think, Justin, about what you mentioned, I think going back to the concept of wisdom as in the classical Sophia word that the Greeks used to define philosophy, right? I think Sophia was practical and theoretical knowledge put together to develop a learning and understanding. That is an excellent term, has been around for 2,500 years. Should we go back and start using that a bit more to face these new challenges that technology is giving us, when what is at core is like our role as human beings, right?
I love the fact that you brought up wisdom. I just had a very interesting conversation with a trauma surgeon at my university 2 nights ago. And he asked 3 interesting questions. He said, can AI be wise? Is AI making us less wise? And could AI be utilized to make us wiser? Right? And I thought those are 3 very interesting questions to ask.
And very difficult to answer, right? Yeah.
Awesome. Let's turn it over to the audience. I'm happy to take questions to the panel, but I'm also happy to hear your thoughts and what you're doing in your institutions or any sort of comments you'd like to make. I think we got one in the back there, Matthew. Thanks.
Good evening. My name is Gautam. I'm the director for Team for Tech. I had a question. So with respect to, from an educational standpoint, AI is progressing extremely quickly, right? And the trends are changing on almost like a monthly basis. From a curriculum setting standpoint, is there a risk of us shifting the goalpost or having to shift the goalpost on a regular basis? And from a learning standpoint, will a student ever feel like, okay, I'm never going to catch up with the trend, so I might as well not start?
I think that's a really good question. And if we focus on the tools, then yeah, we're in trouble because the tools are always changing. I think as you mentioned, prompt engineering might be a skill that's important, but down the road it may not be important. Oh, already I think it's not that important, right? So it comes down to underlying skills that I think that we can identify. And this is the skills that we're talking about today: resilience, grit, communication, critical thinking, right? Those will transcend the development of the tools. And if we look at how technology, we know in a sense over history how technology impacts societies depending on the technology. But if we look at it from a social technological point of view, take a systems thinking approach, we can better understand the things that we should be developing and not focus so much on the technology itself. That will run us into trouble, but focus on the skills that tend to transcend or be there across every development of technology.
Thanks.
Thank you very much, first of all. Yes?
Go ahead. And then Matthew, we had one up here after that.
Okay. Hello, everyone. This is Hajar Al Sultan from King Faisal University in Saudi Arabia. First of all, I would like to thank the panelists. It was an excellent presentation and eye-opening. I had a comment plus a question. One of the things that resonates a lot with what Sean said about metacognitive skills and then Bloom's taxonomy and the skills that we need to reinforce with our students, I believe it really resonates with my experience with my students. Since I started teaching after I got my PhD 5 years ago, every time I ask my students in Saudi Arabia, and I teach in the English department at King Faisal University, every time I ask him a question, what does critical thinking mean? I have a silence for maybe like a minute and sometimes 5 minutes. And then until now, recently, I ask them the same question. Every time I teach a course, I ask this first question, and I also have the same silence. If I teach the same student again and I ask the question, some of them they might remember because of the many exercises that I gave them to develop such thinking. So I believe I actually agree with most of what you said about the importance of skills, and then also understanding of what does knowledge, skills, critical thinking, and all these concepts mean to them before we try to really apply it in a class. So one other thing related to AI, every time I give an exercise or an assignment, I say, and they laugh, and I say, no AI, please. Try to think about it first, and then use AI. The other time I had a very short conversation with my oldest daughter. She came up with a brilliant idea, and I asked her, is that an AI kind of thing, or was it your idea? And she was like, Mama, it's my idea. But I asked AI to develop it with me. So I believe there's no way out of AI, but I agree with you that the process of how you build your prompt and then think of how you came up with the result. My question now, how can we as educators help our students and also our kids to understand that there are deeper skills that they need to build? Even me, and I believe maybe most of us, my life got much better with AI. But it's all about the questions that I ask and then what type of biases I already included in my questions. But it's a little bit hard in my context. If my student do not know that much about critical thinking, how am I going to be able to help them develop metacognitive skills first? So I know it's a lot, but I would love to hear from your opinion with such an experience, a very difficult experience for me, because I cannot really teach without thinking of critical thinking being a big part of my curriculum. But if I'm maybe one of very few educators in the department that they try to build such metacognitive skills, what can I do? And how can I really help them develop these skills with AI? I know it's a big question.
So, again, I'm not an educator. My biggest academic project is my 2 kids who drive me crazy. But I tell you one thing that I often tell them, like, look, exactly as you say, AI is here. As you know, the genie is out of the bottle. It's like we cannot put it back. But how you leverage, I think that's important. And for me, maybe I'm very old, writing down how you process the information prior to put it on the system. That makes a big difference, because again, writing is just not a memo. It helps you to, as all of you know very well, it just helps you to funnel things into your head. And I think the younger generation, maybe because they are not so used to pen and paper, they sometimes underestimate the power of that reflexive moment when you are writing something and creating a narrative and then applying that somewhere else, right? If you type it or whatever. At least from at a very anecdotal view, I do feel that that's a necessary step that often gets that, and the power of just being bored as an idea of generating thoughts. Those two things, I think we might be at risk of losing.
There is research to back that up.
Yeah, that's exactly what I
Yeah,
was gonna
there's
say.
definitely research to back that up. In fact, I just saw a post on LinkedIn by Adam Grant, who wrote a really good book on Think Again, I think it was called, talking about that same research. We know that that movement and that connection between writing the notes far outperforms our ability to understand what we're learning than typing it. All right. And so coming back to your question there are a couple of ways. You can make it explicit. You can teach them metacognition. You can teach them how to strategize in a learning journey and self-regulated learning, how to reflect, choose the right tools. That's harder to do sometimes, and I see it not done very well, right? So for example, reflection, faculty members will say, now reflect on today. Well, what? Reflect on what, right? So, and students will not really understand what you mean by reflection. What you're talking about there is you're actually taking a low-tech way and you're implicitly forcing them to reflect on what they're doing, right? Because they're writing it down. So in the classroom, when you design lessons, you can use both high-tech and low-tech approaches, right? The best designed classrooms have the screens, the projector or the TV screens, but they'll have whiteboards all the way around, right? And if you have activities where you get the students in groups, drawing mind maps on the whiteboard, and then talking about something and taking pictures of that and then reflecting on things and then submitting it and then using that as a stepping stone to the next project or the next task, you're indirectly teaching them how to be more metacognitively aware. And you can make that explicit to them or in ways of giving them the terms, though most students won't really want to learn what is metacognition, right? You don't have to name it like that. But there are various ways you can go about doing that. I'm a big proponent of both high-tech and low-tech. I still write notes because that's the best way of learning sometimes.
And just to chime in on that, that process that Sean described, that's exactly how we work in the tech startup that I'm in, that's exactly what we do when we're generating new ideas and products and things. So go ahead.
I was just want to mention that. I think you will be surprised how much whiteboarding goes on companies like Meta and Amazon and Google and all these companies, because again, it's that intermediate step to help you digest concepts that often can be very, very complex, right?
Do we got time for one more? You were patient up here. We're out of time. Do we got something else after this? You want to let her ask a question? You can ask a quick, if you have a comment, a quick question. Yeah, good luck.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Alex. I'm from the Philippines. And just to make this quick, I actually teach grades 5 and grade 6. Well, I've been teaching grades 5 and 6, and our institution allows them to use their iPads in school. But then this year, they banned AI for grades 5 and 6. And as an English teacher, I believe it shouldn't be banned because it actually helps them generate, whenever I teach essays, in writing essays, and the institution banned it because of the foundational skills of the children. They wanted to ensure that the children will enhance their foundational skills first before they use AI. So I just want to hear your thoughts if the students can't really enhance their foundational skills if we integrate it with AI? Should it really be like that? Or can we work with AI while enhancing their foundational skills at a young age? Thank you.
Very quickly, because I know you time. I'm not a childhood education expert, but I do know that you do need to develop the foundational skills before introducing them to AI in that sense. But banning it may not be the best option either, because we know that people are using it outside of the classroom. You can't control that. You can't control what's being done at home, right? So at some point, you need to be introducing some component of it within the education system, at least starting at a very early age to help students develop that self-regulated learning mindset, right? So completely banning it, I think, may be not the best answer, because they'll use it regardless outside, right? But whether or not you use it full on is also questionable, I think.
All right. Thank you very much, everybody. I think we're at time. That was quite an interesting, wide-ranging conversation. We got some wisdom, resilience, discernment, metacognition in there. So hopefully you have something to take with you to discuss over dinner. Thank you again, Alfonso, Sean, Matthias, and everybody else.